hear a little bit from you. So could I get by a show of hands, how many people here are from GM? How many people are from the supplier units?
Nice.
And how many people are retired?
They're all retired.
Okay, now here's a trickier question. How many people here have either worked as a long-term temp or been in a precarious work position? I was, yeah. And how many people have already gone through plant closures before this one? Yeah. Okay, so we know in this room the pitfalls of everything that's happening. We've already seen it, done it, and we need to find ways to fight back, because we know it doesn't just end here with GM. We're going to be finding other jobs. Maybe we're going to stay attached to the auto industry, but we need to know how to fight back, and we need to start doing it, and we need to start showing solidarity with the people who are fighting back. And right now, there's been strikes going on in the States. I don't know how many people heard about the teachers' strikes in the States. That was pretty significant stuff. They've had fast food workers going on strikes. And right now, something that's super important to us as auto workers and tiered workers and people who are fighting for equal pay for equal work and trying to get away from long-term temp situations is the strike in the States. So, without too much more from me, I'm going to just introduce Sean Crawford.
If I could just add one more thing. Anybody here that presently holds an elected position or has held an elected position in the past?
I don't know.
Is that present? Okay, how about present?
About 1, 2.
Okay. It kind of tells you what's going on in this local right now.
Thanks, Vic. So, Sean Crawford is a rank and file activist who's been fighting against a two-tier system. He's a member of the UAW Local 598 Flint Truck Assembly, and he previously worked at the Poletown plant in Detroit, Hamtramck, before it was downsized. It was downsized. The announcement was made at the same time as the Oshawa assembly plant. And without further ado,
There's a book that was written a long time ago about Flint, Michigan. It's called Rivet.
I know which one you're talking about. There's a lot of really excellent books out there about Flint, the Flint sit-down strike and stuff, but that's an excellent one as well, yeah, for sure.
Thank you. I hope you appreciate it.
Yeah.
Heck yeah.
What we'll do is we're gonna let Sean talk. We're going to let Frank speak. We've got a short video, and then we're going to open up the room for questions. So if you could save your questions till the end, that would be great.
Yeah, I definitely. Sincerely, thank you for having us and for inviting us up here. I mean, it's awesome. I love being in Ontario. So fundamentally, capitalist and the power of the wealthy depends on our division as workers. We can never successfully achieve what we want to achieve, which is basically getting the most of our surplus value that we possibly can if we're divided and we're weak, right? And there's many different ways that they divide and conquer. So they can do it either by race or by gender, or if we want to be specific to our unions, right, they do it by tiered wage system, by part suppliers, by third-party people within the plant, right, where they're subcontracting and subdividing us, right, temporary part-time workers, which I understand is a big concern up here in Oshawa as well. These things are really insidious ways for the wealthy to divide and conquer our union and make us even weaker. They also do it in other ways, right, so either by different sectors. Say, for example, in the past you were able to do what was called a solidarity strike. Right? So if your brothers and sisters were going on strike across the street in a different industry, you could join them in working class solidarity and do something to come together and actually try to achieve a more powerful union as a result, right? And that's how we built working class power. and another way, and I think this is most pertinent to, us being here together today, that they try to separate us as by nation and by language and things of that nature, right? They try to say, hey, we're different, we shouldn't be working together. They erect laws to keep us separated, right? Whereas the whole time, the capitalist class and the wealthy are they're basically creating these trade laws to, unify themselves. So, with NAFTA or the US MCA, they can trade anywhere they want. They can move our jobs anywhere they want. They can exploit, the lowest paid workers anywhere they want, right? But for us, we can't form unions across borders, and why is that? It doesn't make any sense, right? If they can, on an international level, fight us and whipsaw us back and forth against one another, why can't we unite together across borders, whether it's Canada, the United States, or Mexico, and try to help our fellow brothers and sisters? That's the fundamental way that we're going to rebuild working class power. And so basically the labor movement is about unity, right? The larger our bargaining unit is, the more power we have. It was just like the CIO unions back in the day, right? The idea of the Congress of Industrial Organizations is we had to forget about all the craft guilds and forget about all the tradesmen, and we need to come together because we're all being exploited similarly by the capitalist class. And we have, just like back with when the CIO took over from the AFL in the United States and here in Canada as well, we have to actually go further than that and unite even more across borders and try to make something work for ourselves. Otherwise, we're just going to be whipsawed and erased to the bottom, right? And this might be a little controversial, but it's my personal opinion and it's what I've observed. GM does not care about our communities. GM does not care about our countries. They mimic and mouth and they say a lot of garbage, but when it comes down to it, when it comes to actually investing in our communities, making, trying to help us have good paying jobs, boom, all they care about is money and the bottom line. Even though we bailed them out, even though we took relentless, endless rounds of concessions, all they care about is money, pure and simple. And so that's why I'm saying everything I'm saying. How do we combat that? How do we combine in a more powerful way so we can actually beat them on their own level instead of trying the same old that hasn't worked? Because what is the definition of insanity, right? Trying the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. And that's what we're doing both in the UAW definitely, and from what I hear in Unifor as well. And that's really disappointing because I hear a lot of militant rhetoric out of Unifor, and I think, and you guys had a sit-down strike here. I mean, my God, when was the last time a sit-down strike happened, I mean, you guys have some guts, and you have what it takes clearly, but how do we manifest that in such a way to where we can actually nationalize and take over the plant and make it the engine of the Green New Deal here in this community, right? When I was working with the Detroit Democratic Socialists of America, we had this idea of creating something called the Great Lakes Authority, kind of modeled after the Tennessee Valley Authority that happened under the New Deal legislation back in the 30s. And the idea was, hey, we have this massive amount of unused industrial capacity all over the Midwest, right? And here in Canada as well. There's so much potential to this. We could be building wind turbines and solar panels and all kinds of electric cars and hydrogen buses and anything we want, right, to benefit ourselves. Why aren't we doing that? I mean, I saw your guys' facility. It's huge. It's massive. There's potential there. I saw that every day when I was, I grew up in Flint. I'd walk to school and I'd see these abandoned houses and these abandoned buildings and these abandoned small factories where they used to do welding. I'm like, why does this have to happen? In a society that is the wealthiest society that the world has ever known, we're going to allow this kind of poverty? There are ways around that. There are answers to these questions and to these problems that we all face. But we have to be creative and we have to have the political will to make it happen, right? And it can't happen without all you folks, right? And it can't happen without us in the United States working forward as well. And so that's why we've been putting this out as a bold vision to try to reinterpret how we can have a relationship with our industry, right? Because if we're going to bail you out and take a never-ending round of concessions and you're just going to abandon us and our families and our communities in the end, God damn it, they owe it to us. These are our factories. We worked in them forever, for generations. And we're just gonna let it go away? You know what I mean? Don't these politicians feel that? It's supposed to be a democracy, not the rule of the rich. You know what I'm saying? Like, seriously, how can they go from country to country and whipsaw us and say, oh, well, you know, your labor laws are weaker over here, so I'm gonna put jobs over there, and they're willing to accept lower wages, I'm gonna put my jobs over here, but we can't make a democratic decision amongst ourselves to say, hey, we made these billions for you over all these years. We're the one that allowed Mary Bauer to make $22 million a year, which is obscene, by the way. And we can't make a democratic decision to take our plants back and actually build the things we need so we can give a livable planet to our children? That's ridiculous.
Can't take the $1 billion that they want. It's gonna be a police.
So for me, I feel like there are three things that really have to happen for us over the long term as a labor movement. Firstly, there has to be democratic accountability of our unions. And I'm not super familiar with how the Unifor structure works, but in the US, the UAW, we do not have direct elections of our international executive board, right? So we don't know who these people are a lot of times that are running our organization, and they're not directly accountable to us. So it's resulted in a lot of distance from the membership, a lot of cronyism, and a lot of corruption, which is disgusting. We have to get back to our working class roots. None of them people should be making more than you or I, because we're all supposed to be equal. That's the fundamental principle of a union, is equality. And if the people running the union at the top are not equal to us, of course they're gonna have a different viewpoint. Of course they're gonna think they're part of the corporate class. So that has to happen first and foremost. But after that, we gotta work on global labor unity. I can't say this enough. I mean, when I was driving up from Port Huron to get here, I saw all these companies with like 5, 6, 7 different flags of all different nations that they organize in and they operate in, right? And they're proudly displaying it. We're an international company. But yet you don't see that with our unions. Why is that? We gotta be on their level or we're never gonna beat them. That's ridiculous. And so that's one of the reasons I'm so happy to come up here to talk with you folks, to try to help plant the seeds to build that. You know, it can't just be me and Frank, it's gotta be all of us. But this is the start of something. And after that, you know, you definitely have to build a political movement that will allow you to seize the means of production democratically, right? And this can happen. And I understand y'all have a left party here, the New Democratic Party. I don't know a lot about them. I hear they're not perfect, but there are some people in it who are open to those ideas. And that's more than a lot of what we have in the United States. So hammer them hard. And if they don't do what you want them to do, run against them. You know? That's my philosophy. It's the same thing with your union local. They should be out here fighting for us and screaming and yelling and shouting and talking. And if they don't do what you say, run against them, because it's a democratic organization. It's our organization. So the last thing I want to mention, and this is something, I don't know, maybe not as relevant to you folks, because y'all are lucky enough to have national health care, as imperfect as it is. But I don't know if y'all heard that halfway through last month, GM, this has never happened before, they always let to the end of the month for our health care to stay. They canceled it as a way to extort us. They said, oh, you want to go on strike? Guess what? Well, you know, your daughter can die, or your family can be sick, or you could go bankrupt. You know, it shows you point blank what they're all about. They're not about caring about us. They're not about America. They're not about Canada. They're not about Flint, and they're definitely not about Oshawa. They're about themselves and making money. And I'd say remember that when you think, oh, you know, we just need another bailout. You need to take care of us and help us out and all that bullshit they spew. Look at how they cared about U.S. workers when we decided to go on strike to stand up for equal wage and equal pay for equal work. You know, I mean, that's disrespectful and dangerous for all these families.
Evil.
Downright evil. Downright evil. And I could go on and on talking about what's going on with the strike and all the issues that we have around the strike and what we're negotiating for and what we want to win. I'll leave that more for the Q&A section, but yeah, that's my spiel, and I appreciate y'all having us here. Well, you see the sign over here, everyone tier 1. That was my slogan, and to me that's the biggest issue. Because unless we're all equal, we can't move forward as a unit. Unless we're all equal, we can't all have the same demands. We can't all, because because it's power in numbers. You have to act as a unit going forward. That's how you win collective demands, right? And because we are so unequal with first tier, second tier, temporary part-time, like 3 or 4 different third parties within the plant, all functioning as the same local, you know what I mean? It's ridiculous. So to make everyone equal is what we need to do. That needs to be the #1 demand, because unless people are equal, you lose the soul of the movement, you lose the soul of the union, right? So that's, for me, all wrapped in one, everyone tier 1 is the #1 demand. I, after 8 years, was able to top out as a second tier employee. And I don't care about having a raise. I don't even want a raise. All I want is my brothers and sisters who are temporary and third party and all of them, they need to get hired in. You know, because it's all about us being equal, period. As far as how the strike is going, to be honest, I think there's a strong institutional memory in Michigan and in Flint specifically, where I'm from. People really, in their heart, believe in the labor movement. So everyone's horn honking. Everybody's donating food, everybody's, you know, coming out from Ford and Chrysler, and the nurses unions and the teachers unions have been coming out. So a lot of people are holding pretty strong right now. That said, the weather's getting crappier, you know, we've missed a few paychecks now. You know, there might be a little grumbling, but I think all in all, people's hearts are in the right place. People are focused because they see how much money GM's been making over the last few years at our expense. And they want it back, and they know they're not gonna give up anything without a fight.
At our expense, and we're still gonna show up every day, or get in trouble.
You know what I mean? And so we decided, hey, they're gonna have this auto prom and say, hey, you're doing so good, this is for charity, blah, blah, blah. We're gonna crash that party and let them know what we really think about what they're doing to our community. So that was the context of all that. And one more thing that I just learned about the Oshawa plant is there was land that was seized by General Motors to build that plant. Something y'all might not realize is that Detroit Hamtramck Assembly was actually built on seized land as well. It was one of the few instances where they actually use eminent domain to take private property and put it back into private hands just for General Motors to make a profit. So they actually demolished an entire Polish immigrant neighborhood, right? Build that plant, and then this is how they repaid us, is by using it as a bargaining chip in negotiations. So what y'all are going through is something that's been, I mean, it's part of their playbook, and I feel you.
These people making these decisions to do this to us, they are not captains of a ship. A real captain goes down with the ship. Right. These people are cowards.
And that's why we need a mutiny.
At this time, I'd like to introduce one of the leaders of the mutiny, Frank Hammer. Frank is the past president of UAW Local 909, Warren Transmission. Warren is now closed. It was one of the 5 plants recently targeted by GM. Frank is a founding member of the Auto Workers Caravan and is on the board of directors for the Real News Network. And Frank, maybe you could speak just a little bit about the Caravan as well. Thank you.
So, thank you so very, very much for all of you being here. And it's a pleasure to have this cross-border transnational connection. And when we talked about it with Tony, Tony said this is not just a one-shot deal. This is something that it should be an ongoing campaign by us to concretely build solidarity across borders. Dan, we work for the same employer. Why in the world? What's taking us so long for seeing that we have common interests, not between just Canada and ourselves, not just between ourselves and Mexico, but all of the workers in Latin America, the workers in Asia, and so on. We need to build transnational, international solidarity. And that's why we're here, and we thank you for coming. It's also kind of a, Tony mentioned that all these retirees that came from Unifor Local 222 was an incredible sight at this demonstration that you just saw, and also to see the Brazilians there. And I want to tell you a couple of stories that will include what we're talking about here. What preceded this are two events that I think are very important. One was the announcement in November about the closing of, or the unallocating of, the GM plants. And I want to mention there were 4 in the US, 1 in Canada, and there were 2 unnamed overseas. And I think when we talk about plant closures, it's not enough to talk about just North America. It's to be aware that these plant closures by GM are going on elsewhere, but we don't get told those reports. Those reports should be very important to us. The other thing that happened in November was the election of not only Rashida Tlaib, but we had this whole congressional sweep that was a response to the Trump regime, and it was an awakening of a democratic impulse. And in our neck of the woods, we had this incredible congressional person, Rashida Tlaib, who literally was the one that was on the bullhorn at this demonstration. I don't remember too many representatives in Congress that were at the bullhorn. That's Rashida Tlaib. It was awesome. So I just want to mention that the Auto Worker Caravan began or formed during the crisis in 2008, right after the Wall Street financial crisis, which was used by the big three, especially by GM and Chrysler, to shave the UAW. They couldn't do it at the negotiating table, and they needed a crisis, like the Wall Street financial crisis, to come to us and hold a gun to our heads and say, if you don't give us what we want, we're going under. And the U.S. government facilitated that, from Bush to Barack Obama, and it was done to us, and it was done in a very mean-spirited manner, including taking away our right to strike from 2011 or 2009 until 2015. I mean, it was a real attack on what the UAW had established through all the sacrifices and all the struggles in all the years. So the Auto Worker Caravan formed in response to that crisis by actually having a caravan go to DC on December 8th of 2008, saying we have an alternative vision for what should happen in auto. We promoted the idea of single-payer health care, no big deal to you all, but it's a big deal to us. And we promoted the conversion of our plants. So this was in 2008. The conversion of our plants, not to be closed, but to be reopened and to begin to produce product that was favorable to an environment that would be sustainable. Green products like my brain's slow tonight. Like Sean was saying about mass transportation, electrification. That is what we advocated in 2008, and we've been doing it ever since. So it's a great heart for us to know that there's a project going on here at Oshawa that's trying to talk about green conversion and creating green new jobs. Because I, for one, believe that we're living in a moment of great crisis for humanity and for all living things on this planet, and these things are very critically important. So, this was the birth of making Detroit the engine of the Green New Deal, this demonstration that you just saw. And the fact that Rashida and other congressional representatives have been advocating the Green New Deal has opened up a whole new dialogue in our country about the direction of our economy. So, and the Auto Worker Caravan, incidentally, was part of organizing this. We've been organizing demonstrations at the auto show practically every year, and this became this wonderful moment where we coalesced with 16 other organizations, and it brought together auto workers, environmentalists, community activists in one single action. And I can tell you that it was a charity ball, so all these people that came in these gowns and these tuxedos were very uncomfortable having to walk the gauntlet between where they were coming from and all of us to get into that auto show. It was quite a moment. So I also should mention, and I think this is very important for people to understand, well, where's the UAW? Meaning, where's the UAW leadership? And I think I will do some illustrations of that so you understand. So by virtue of us having this demonstration, it compelled the international leadership, the UAW leadership, to have a candlelight vigil. And they held a candlelight vigil a quarter of a block away and made sure not to be part of what we were doing. But they held a candlelight vigil a quarter of a block away. Everybody was there holding candles, like it was like a funeral procession. And we actually outnumbered them. The UAW had maybe 60 people there as part of this vigil. We were the ones that were responsible for all the Canadians being there. We were the ones responsible for the Brazilians there, not the UAW. Picture that. So our next connection with Unifor was we had an event we organized at my local union, 909, to commemorate the Flint sit-down strike, February 11th, right, 1937. And it's so very, very important to understand the roots of where we come if we are to understand what our struggle is all about and how we go forward, understanding, grasping what were the roots of our union to begin with, what was the roots of that working class struggle. And it was live streamed, and I think people here witnessed our event that we held, and we both spoke at that one, and that we held back at my local. So there's a lot of connections. So then, you may not know, but when we had the Democratic Party debates in downtown Detroit, the second debate, we had a massive demonstration in the streets, and of course they'd likely not reported it, and you may not be aware of it. But it involved a DSA, it involved the Sunrise Movement, it involved auto workers, it involved the SEIU, the Service Employees International Union. They came out in droves. They brought people from Chicago to demonstrate in the streets of Detroit on behalf of the Green New Deal and demanding that the debates incorporate the question of climate change, which by and large it has not. The debates have been by and large silent and stayed away from the question of the climate crisis. Anyway, that was awesome. The UAW was notably absent in the streets of Detroit on that day. So, and now we have a strike. And I think that this is a pretty momentous event, that we're seeing this opening and this rupture of working class struggle in the industrial sphere, not public, not the teachers. These are industrial workers, these are auto workers that are now on strike, and I think we're on the 19th or 20th day, I've lost track. But this is pretty amazing. The last strike that people participated in, those who were working back then, was in 2007. And that was a show strike. It lasted 1 or 2 days. The last strike that I'm cognizant of, that involved GM, involved 2 locations back in the 90s, and it was a 54-day strike, and it shut down GM. It was major, but it involved just 2 plants. So this is a very major event, and I think it creates all kinds of openings for us as activists and as unionists. So a week after our strike started, there was another strike. It was a youth-led global strike against the climate crisis, the largest in humanity's history. We had 4 million people, more, all around the world, everywhere, in every country, in every continent, striking against the climate. And, you know, we have Greta Thunberg to thank for that. She's been spectacular. So in Detroit, we had our own demonstration. We had about 400 people that demonstrated, went into downtown, had a very spirited march. And fortunately, I was the only one that was over 35 that got to speak at it. And I got to say a few things. And I'll share a little bit of what I said. But basically what I asked for was we needed to merge the 2 strikes. We needed to merge the strike against the climate crisis with the strike that was going on against GM. We need to bring those together as one movement. The climate movement, the climate crisis movement, and the auto workers movement. So in the speech that I delivered, what I said there was that Detroit before World War II. The year before, 1940, and this I have to tell you, it has a lot to do with Walter Reuther, advocated for the conversion of production at the auto plants in sight of or in view of the potential attack by Nazi Germany against Great Britain. Overseas, right? But there was a threat. And in response to that threat, there was a call for the U.S. to begin to build armaments to help the forces of democracy beat and defeat the forces of fascism. And it was a very monumental moment in world history at that very moment. And the vision of a Reuther, or the vision of a Roosevelt, that said, we need to very quickly convert the auto plant so that we can produce the war material that we need to help to defeat German fascism. The automakers said, oh yeah, we'll be happy to do that. We'll start building the plants soon, and we'll get to it. And FDR said, nope, we need to do it now. And as you well know, you can't buy a 1943 Ford. You can't buy a 1942 Studebaker because they didn't make them. They literally stopped making cars so that, in fact, the capitalists, in response to a national need, had to convert to production to deal with the threat at that time in Europe. And it was remarkable. The conversion was very quick. It happened like in 8 months. So we understand that it can be done. And we don't need any less fast, any less quick conversion today of our auto plants than this moment in time to address the climate crisis. Because if anybody knows or understands what the United Nations, the scientists, have said, is we have basically 12 years to reduce our carbon footprint by 50%, which is pretty dramatic. It's no less dramatic than what was happening at the beginning of World War II. I would say it's more dramatic. And that sense of urgency, I think, is what's being brought on by the global climate marches. And it's something that should infuse us in terms of what we need to do as workers. And I have to say, one of the biggest concerns in this whole question of environment and jobs is, we need to get into a just transition for workers to go from, let's say, a dirty fossil fuel industry into a clean energy, renewable energy. Well, we don't have that problem because we have 5 plants that have been shut down. We don't have the problem of just transition. Hey, we got an idea about what we can do with them, as Sean was saying, and as the demonstration talked about. So it's high time that we infuse that urgency into this struggle about what to do. And by the way, my plant is one of the ones that's virtually closed. We have 7 workers left. I used to represent, I was the shop chairman and president, I used to represent about 3,500 workers. And the notion of going and seeing that hunk of metal that used to be my factory and it's closed basically is tragic and it's criminal. So unfortunately the UAW is not advocating for a Green New Deal. So they're not saying very much about what to do with our plants, our closed plants. But this is one of the main issues that we should all be involved in. It's going to have an impact on the community in Detroit, in Warren, in my community, in Baltimore, Lordstown, Ohio. So this is a major fight, and it seems to me that the UAW hasn't said. The only people that are saying anything about it is GM. And GM came out right before the strike and said, oh, we have an idea about what to do about the 2 of the plants. Not very significant, but they talked about an electric truck at the Detroit Hamtramck Assembly, and they talked about a battery plant somewhere in Lordstown, Ohio. And then yesterday we learned, oh, we're taking that back. We're not making that offer anymore. Right? Right? So a little coercion going on here, right? So, all right. So let me make another connection with your local and local 222. recently did a wonderful thing. Passed a resolution in the spirit of internationalism in support of GM workers in Colombia. And there's probably very little known about it. I've got a couple posters up there about it, but the reason I want to bring it up is because the whole notion of Sean's sign, everyone tier 1, is very impactful and very important, not within just the borders of the U.S. or not just within the borders of Canada or not just within a plant, but the question is, as long as the corporate system internationally is based on tiers, there's no way in the world we can eliminate tiers in the belly of the monster. So what do we have? We have a multi-tier structure. All of North America is tier 1. The people in Colombia is tier 2 and 3 and 4, and the people in India are tier 2, 3, and 4. If we want to really, really have an impact on everyone tier 1, we have to think globally. And what does it mean? It means bringing everybody up to tier 1. And so as part of our international solidarity, we look at the workers who are most impacted by GM's odious practices in terms of a workplace. And where you'll find that is in a GM plant in Colombia, which I've been involved with, and Sean's been involved with for a number of years now, actually dating back to 2012. And in 2011, GM workers in Colombia were routinely fired after suffering injuries on the job. Spinal injuries, you see one of the posters shows the spinal injury suffered by one of the workers. And what GM routinely did is any worker that they identified through their medical records as having been injured on the workplace, they would change their records and fire them and deny them workers' comp, and they'd be out on the street and they wouldn't be able to work and they would have nothing. And this was routine. They had busted their union in the 90s. Their union was a militant union in the 90s. It was busted. So GM engaged in this practice. And some of the workers decided to say, no, we're not going to do this. We're going to fight back. And they formed an Injured Workers Association. And they wanted to try to go the legal route. They couldn't do anything the legal route. Why? Because GM had already corrupted the judges. So they took the recourse of setting up a tent encampment at the U.S. Embassy in the city of Bogota in Colombia. Why? Because Barack Obama was president and GM was at that moment in time controlled by the U.S. government as a result of the bailout. Well, the U.S. government didn't do crap. And a year later, they're still out in their encampment, a year later, and they decided to go on a hunger strike. And they sewed their lips shut as part of their hunger strike to dramatize what was going on. It took 22 days into that hunger strike for General Motors executives in suits and the UAW, in the face of Joe Ashton, the then vice president, to show up to try to make the problem go away. And they set up this phony mediation and gave the workers a final offer. You take it or you leave it. And the workers said to their offer, we can't take it because that won't even cover the medical costs that we would have to endure for the surgeries that we need. Never mind supporting our families. And GM and Joe Ashton of the UAW turned around, packed up, went back home, and they both, in the same tune, said, these workers are asking for too much. These workers are asking for too much. GM said it, and the UAW said it. These brothers have been in the tent encampment ever since. Ever since. Their numbers have been diminished. But they are there to this day. Now into the 9th year of that encampment. And we have been in a struggle to engage in actions of solidarity and support, just like the local did here. And the local issued a resolution It sent it to Mary Barra, it sent it to the GM executive here in Canada. It sent $500 to the workers in Canada to help them sustain, and that's what we've been doing. But it's a very important lesson in terms of if GM can get away with that there, and by the way, they have multi-tiers at that plant too. You know, they have outside contractors working in their plant too. If they can get away with that there, that is exactly the leverage that they use against us to say, oh, you want better than that? Well, sorry, we're going over there. Because we can get away with a whole lot more. And that's what the practice is. Whatever they can get away with, whatever we let them get away with, is what they're going to do. So, which brings me to the subject back of the UAW. You can't get away from it. Every day you see another aspect of what's called a corruption scandal. And to me, it's a tip of the iceberg of what's problematic, or what's been problematic about my union, about our union. That for years they thought they had a social compact with the companies. You take care of, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. And it really became a culture, especially at the top echelons of the leadership. And I know, I mean, I was not only a local officer, I served on staff for 6 years, on the umpire staff. Had an up-close, personal kind of look, although they kept me away from some of that stuff. We have a problem. And some of the leadership began to think of themselves as, well, if we're promoting this joint partnership, then we in the leadership should be able to live like all you corporates live. And they really got that into their head. And we heard a lot about that at Chrysler, and now we're focusing, now it's coming around to General Motors now. And a fellow staff member, Mike Grimes, just a few weeks ago, pled guilty to kickbacks of $2 million. And he's going to be looking at 5 years in prison. We have another GM rep, who I also know personally, from out of Tonawanda, who's going to be doing a plea deal on October 20th. And these two fellows worked for Joey Ashton, the guy that I told you earlier went down to Columbia to try to make this problem go away. And Joe Ashton is now in the papers as accepting $500,000 in kickback. So any day now, I expect that he's going to get arrested. Or he's going to have to, turn himself in. And it may not end there. So the lesson is that there are ways that they have betrayed us as workers. And they betrayed the Colombian workers when they went down there and to try to make the problem go away. What made it matters worse is that the UAW then instructed every other union that wanted to help to stay away. Including Unifor. Because we, the activists in Detroit and in the US, went to Unifor saying, look, we can't get any help from the UAW. Would you be able to help the Colombian workers? So the representative from Unifor contacted UAW in Detroit and said, what's the deal? And Detroit answered back, oh, you don't want to do that. These workers are asking for too much. We can't bargain anything like that for them. And the Unifor went away. The steel workers wanted to help and went away. The International Labor Metal Workers Federation, Industrial, wanted to help. The UAW said, stay away. This is what we're dealing with. It's a complete betrayal. And there's no question that once this strike is concluded, that rank and file workers need to organize to take their union back so that we can really exercise international solidarity so that we would be here sponsored by the UAW, right? Not here in spite of the UAW, but because of the UAW. That's what we need to do. That's what we need to build. And that's why this event is so important. And probably I should stop there, but I think I've shared enough with you for maybe a lively conversation about our strike. And I want to second, what Sean said. The spirit on the lines has been really remarkable. My plant, because it only has 7 workers, can't even man or woman a picket line. So we've had all these foreign placer workers who, after or before their shifts, come by and in solidarity with our workers, our strikers, have been on the picket line. And it's been wonderful. And they've told me stories about how they've been driven to tears about the kind of support that they've gotten. And they said, yeah, we got some tool and die shops up and down the road, and they'll come over and they're going to bring food. And they came over during their lunchtime, and they joined us on the picket line and things of that order. And it's been really a wonderful resurgence of a working class spirit that has been really phenomenal by the opening that this has provided with this strike. And I hope that we grab a hold of that spirit, of that working class solidarity and fighting spirit, and build on it, well beyond whatever the outcome and the result of the strike. But your support and your being here tonight is a very important piece of it, because the more stories that we can tell about the solidarity that GM workers are experiencing and seeing, the stronger they will be, bad weather or not. Thank you.